Granville. My name is Marge Brunston. I'm the president of the Greater Sioux County Genealogical Society in Sioux Center. And we've been doing our programs on the early settlers of Sioux County, and we're up to Granville now. We've done most of the cities in Sioux County, and most of them are on our YouTube channel if you want to watch any of them. Some of them, the sound's not too good. We're kind of learning. We're not professional videographers. Right, Haley?
Thanks. It is.
Okay, so I am not from here, and I'm going to do my best. So a little bit about me. My name is Emily Frederick. I've been the city clerk here over 4 years. Originally from Remsen. My grandparents moved to Remsen in 1964. Their names were Ray and Betty. If anybody knows, everybody knows them as school teachers. So they worked there until retirement. My grandpa Ray was born on the Yankton Sioux Indian Reservation in South Dakota. In a little town called Ravinia. It's kind of by Lake Andes, which they're about the same town. So when he was born, his biological mom and dad were 15 years old, 14 or 15. They were very young. And his mom then died a year before he was a year old. So he was raised by his grandparents on the reservation. He was only about a quarter Yankton Sioux on his mother's side, but they were very, very poor, and he was very ashamed of it. He didn't like to be Native, so at 16, he lied to the government, joined the Army, and went off to World War II. So here's an idea of how bad it is being poor like that. But basically, they just waited for money from the government. That never came. But his biological father is a man named Glenn Jones. So Glenn also served in World War II. They were very close in age, about 14 years apart. But Glenn worked for the National Park Service in South Dakota. He went to work with Borglum carving. He was a driller. And then he maintained Mount Rushmore after its completion. So basically he lived behind the monument. He was the only person allowed by the Park Service to scale the faces, fix the cracks, and do all the work. He's also famously was the second baseman for the Mount Rushmore Drillers. And that's him right there. So I have never been to Mount Rushmore. It's something that I have to do because his name is, I've never been there. It's all over, and yeah, so enough about me. So I won't spend a lot of time here. Can you turn it down a little bit? Does it seem like it's really loud? You're making me nervous. Is that better? Is that better? Okay. But I believe it's important to talk about why it took so long in the 1800s to settle this area, and why large groups of people didn't settle here until the 1870s. So from the 1700s to 1850, this area of Iowa is all open, tall grass prairie, within the seasonal homeland of the eastern Dakota, specifically the Yankton Sioux. The nearest Euro-American settlements were still many miles away to the east, and the landscapes were dramatically different than what we know today. This would have been a hunting ground for the Yankton Sioux, particularly the Sisseton and Wahpeton bands. So unlike, there wasn't like tribes that settled here, it was mostly just a hunting ground, and they passed through and got resources and moved on. And so up until 1850, most of northwest Iowa was recognized by the U.S. government as Dakota Sioux homeland. And so July 1851, representatives of the U.S. government negotiated the Treaty of Traverse des Sioux up in what is now Minnesota. But basically they ceded 21 million acres of land for about $1.665 million. So very low cost for their land. The government promised annual payments and annuities, goods and supplies, schools, agricultural assistance, and reservation land along the Minnesota River, but most of those promises were never fulfilled or partially fulfilled. They never really got what they were promised. And then a few weeks later, these two gentlemen, they also went to Mendota, Minnesota, to negotiate the remainder of the land in Iowa that was still being settled by the Dakota. That guy in the middle, Henry H. Sibley, he wasn't a great guy. He actually quit the army and joined the South to fight in the Civil War, so he ended up being a Confederate. So the negotiations for this land continued until 1852. The Dakota ceded much of their land. They received a total of $3.75 million, which is only about 12 cents per acre, to be paid over several decades, but most of it was unfulfilled, most of it was not paid. So the treaties of 1851 didn't instantly create farms and towns. It made settlement legally possible, but the prairie remained wild and isolated. It would take another 20 years before the first families began to arrive. So the Dakota had signed the treaty ceding their land. Many bands of the Dakota were expected to live on reservations. Government annuities were late or inadequate. There was crop failure, a very severe winter, causing widespread hunger among the Dakota communities. And one band of Dakota, led by a man named Inkpaduta, is that it? Okay. Living outside the reservation system. His brother and family were murdered by a white trader named Henry Lott. Lott was never brought to justice, deepening resentment. So he traveled. He went down to a town here, and that person there that he was friendly with had moved, and then he was mistreated at that home, and then he was traveling north up into Spirit Lake. But so between March 8th and March 12th, 1857, Inkpaduta's band attacked isolated cabins around Spirit Lake and Okoboji. They killed approximately 35 to 40 settlers, including men, women, and children. And they took 4 women captive. The youngest was a 13-year-old girl named Abby Gardner. She was later ransomed and returned back to her family's cabin in Spirit Lake, and that cabin actually still stands today as a historic site. But because it was so horrific, survivors and messengers traveled long distances through deep snow to warn other settlers about the attacks.
Did they kind of follow down the river?
They followed the Little Sioux.
Yeah, they followed the
They
Little
went.
Sioux.
Yeah.
Yep.
Tried to find food because they were starving, and then anyone they could find along that river, they just killed them all. Kids, didn't matter.
I used to work for Okoboji Plastic Cars for Toby Shine,
Sure.
and a big part of my job was doing research, and I studied Abby Gardner's story tons.
Oh, really?
Just like what you said, Inkpaduta and his Indians, they were promised things from the government that never happened.
Yeah.
Just like what you said.
Yeah, they couldn't hunt on their lands anymore. So basically, they're like, we're not going to give you a way to live. You just need to live over here because we're all going to live here. I suppose it probably would have been different if they were paid, you know? Yeah. So, of the most famous messengers after this attack was William Marble. He walked many miles through blizzard conditions to seek help after escaping the attacks, and then his story became legendary across Iowa. For families considering moving west to this area, the attack was terrifying. It significantly delayed migration. Some people abandoned their claims and went back east. And then the U.S.-Dakota War took place in 1862, which was a direct result of the unfulfilled treaties. That was brutal. Sorry, I'm very nervous. And involved the Santee Sioux specifically. It forced Dakota out of Minnesota completely and permanently into the Dakotas and Nebraska. And the Civil War took place from 1861 to 1865, so young men who might have settled here instead went and served in the Union Army. So although the land was available, settlement didn't really begin until the 1870s. So this is, I kind of played around with it a little bit, but it's an artistic reconstruction of what the area would have looked like in 1870. The National Park Service describes that Iowa's original prairie grasses commonly reached 6 to 12 feet in height. No roads, no fences, no farms, no towns, only miles upon miles of tall, waving grass. Early pioneers described northwest Iowa as having grass taller than horseback rider's stirrups, few trees except along streams, prairie fires visible for miles, and wolves howling at night. Deer and prairie chicken were also a common sight. It was basically a nearly treeless ocean of grass in all directions. And wind that never stops, which is still what we have now. So the opening of the Black Soil book by Josephine Donovan perfectly captures what immigrant families would have experienced. So the Connor family travels west by ox team after leaving the railroad behind. Ahead of them is nothing but endless prairie. Nell Connor wonders if they are heading anywhere at all because every direction looks the same. There are no towns, trees, or landmarks, just grass reaching into the horizon. So once the treaties were ratified by Congress, federal survey crews began dividing Sioux County into the grid still visible today. So townships were 6 by 6 miles, sections were 1 square mile or 640 acres, quarter sections and property corners. The survey system made it possible to legally purchase and homestead the land. So in the late summer of 1855, George Stump, deputy surveyor, and 4 assistants arrived in what is now East Orange Township to begin work. They divided the sections, marked the land September 26, 1855. He began work in Floyd Township, and work in Sioux County was completed in 1857. Government surveyors were considered the forerunners of civilization as we know it here. They made settling orderly, helped prevent land disputes or disputes over land titles. This is a snippet of the oldest map I could find, which actually somebody brought in the actual map that it's from. So that's that one over there. And so one name specifically is where I'm going to go next. So Granville, also called Ricker, and then Peter Galen, on the land that the church cemetery sits on today. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on Peter Galen. So he immigrated to America, settled in St. Donatus, Iowa, which is just south of Dubuque. He prospered in his business there, including mercantile and milling work. He was among the most honored and wealthy citizens in Jackson County. Upon completion of the Dubuque and Sioux City Railroad, Peter intended to go west. So in 1870, Peter and his family arrived at an unnamed station in what is now Lamar's. He built a flour mill, though there was not 50 acres of wheat in the area. And there were many unclaimed sections in Plymouth County at that time. So he went back to St. Donatus, brought back 40 fellow Luxembourgers and Germans to settle in Plymouth County. And let's see, the trip took 2 weeks. Everything they owned was in their prairie schooners, pulled by oxen. They had about 100 cattle behind the wagons, which is why it took about 2 weeks. And when they got here, all the land was taken up. It was all gone. Everyone claimed it. Peter learned of a Dutch settlement up north along the Floyd River. So there was a lot of government land available up here, but the Dutch were on the west banks of the Floyd River, so they decided to go to the east side of the Floyd River. And without delay, they traveled up here into Nassau Township, south of Alton, through East Orange Township, and north into Floyd Township. The settlers, being of German and Luxembourg nationality, found the Dutch to be unfriendly, which I don't think anyone's ever said that before. Although, if you read the Black Soil book, some of the Germans seem to be not very friendly either. I think it probably goes both ways. So, according to Charles Dyke, these are the names of some of them. This is not exhaustive. This is just some of the names of the people that came with Peter Galen. And Joe Kuntz, you can probably let me know if there's any more. He might know more. So in June of 1870, federal census workers came to take stock of people living up here. Let's see. So they started in Floyd Township. Because of their thick German accents and some Dutch, they were very hard to understand. So this is what we can make of it now, what they probably were. They also spoke with families in Floyd Township, and then they went to Nassau Township and recorded those names as well. They recorded mostly English backgrounds in Nassau Township, although there were a lot of Irish immigrants, and they just called the Irish immigrants English immigrants, which was also kind of offensive to them because they were not English, they were Irish. So almost all the names from the early settlers can still be found in parishes in Alton, Hospers, and Granville, as well as Remsen, Owens, and Lamars. And these are the names that were noted for that were early settlers and still are in parishes today. And 20 years after taking that census, John Pomfrey just gave an interview to the Sioux City Journal and described an incident where he came near Alton and they came upon a herd of over 200 elk, which I think is just to think of that. 200 elk feared a stampede. Another source noted that the Catholic parish recorded of Granville's 90 parish families, 78 were German, which includes 49 Luxembourgers and 12 Irish families. Let's see. So by the early 1880s, there were dozens of established farm families in East Orange Township. The prairie was mostly devoid of trees, so there wasn't enough lumber for everyone to build a house. And any wood that was brought here was very, very expensive. So they lived in sod houses called soddies or dugouts. And you can see that they would cut thick strips of root-bound prairie turf and stack them to create highly insulated homes. You can see the stack lines on that house. Coming here meant they had to break the prairie. The land here was so thick with sod because of thousands of years of tall grass had to be broken and removed to reach the rich, loamy black soil underneath. Early settlers also said it was very wet and marshy. The thick sod held water and didn't drain properly. The Granville Centennial book actually noted that when George Kalenius and family came here in 1882, the conductor asked their destination, and they told him Granville, and the conductor said, "Why, that's just one big duck pond. Why would you want to go there?" But after the sod was broken and the crops were planted, the water drained better, and it wasn't as marshy as it used to be. Granville was platted in 1882 when the Chicago and Northwestern Railroad was planned for this area. So the train wouldn't arrive here until 1883, but we know the town was platted as Grenville after Sir Richard Grenville, a 1500s English privateer and explorer. The train station noted that the town was called Granville. So when the town was incorporated in 1891 as Granville, I believe that it's just because the people had thick German accents and the railroads misunderstood the name of the town and put Granville. And they were just like, well, I guess we're Granville now. It seems to be the best thing I can come up with. Because there's no point when it switches from Granville to Granville other than the train station.
A lot of the people, when they came over and stuff too, changed their names so they didn't, like we were Hoons and had a D in it and stuff, and so they changed their names a little bit so it didn't sound so much like where they were from, so they'd be more Americanized or whatever.
Yeah.
I think a lot of families did that kind of stuff when I was older.
Yeah, and Ellis Island, the workers would just take the easiest way to write their names too, so.
Well, now that is a myth, actually.
Really?
Yeah, because if your ancestor came through Ellis Island didn't change the spelling, because they took the spelling from the original, from their port of origin in Europe. However they spelled it there, that's how they did it in Ellis Island.
Okay.
So if it changed later, lots of people changed the spelling of their name. There wasn't like standard spelling.
Sure.
You get into family history and start digging back, you're going to find it spelled all different ways.
Yeah.
If you've never been to Ellis Island, that is like one of the most bestest places in the world. It's so cool. There's books and books you can find your freaking relatives and testimonies. You can sit there and listen and just sit and look and imagine how them people were treated. I mean, the way they were stacked, it's unbelievable. It's so much better than the stupid Statue of Liberty is nothing. You got to go outside. That is cool.
You can search Ellis Island records online also and look for your relative.
It's all there. You can find it.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. So the first mayor of Granville was P.H. Cronky, or Cronk. The first recorder was N.H. Graff. First treasurer was a man named Henry Ricker. And the trustees were Joseph Overman, Matthias Kellen, J.W. Neild, Casper Gogol, Dominic Berg, and J.P. Schwabach, they come up quite a bit. So it's important to note that Granville wasn't founded. I did some colorizing on the pictures. Kind of makes them a little cooler to look at. Granville wasn't founded because some guy came here and said, I want to build a town. It was founded because the farmers that were already established here needed a town. They needed lumber, they needed cement, blocks, shoes, coats, everything that comes along with that. So the first post office was called Ricker, after F.W. Ricker being the first postmaster of the building. Oh, I was going to go through. Sorry, I colorized some of these pictures. I think they're kind of interesting.
Wasn't a lot of towns made railroad lines too for stop for water and stuff? I mean, you go from Peters, it's every 10 miles. It's like, I think that's where the trains then stop to get water and everything, so that's kind of where the town's going.
They couldn't really survive without the railroad,
Yeah.
especially, this far west. So that was neat. This is a later picture, but I thought it was neat, so I included that in here. This one I found online. The building does actually say Joan Emmers on it, but it's more condensed. But so the first post office was built and ran by a man named F.W. Ricker. So his name also nearly became the name of the town. He was the first postmaster, owned the post office general store building. In the Centennial book, Mrs. Susan Bowers Ricker, maybe you older might remember her, but she also had noted that the town for a couple years was called Ricker until they decided on Granville, and then they kind of just settled with Granville. Couldn't find any pictures of him, although I did find that picture of the post office and the general store, so it's pretty sure that that's the same building. His sons, let's see, so brothers Fred, George, and Henry Ricker are noted numerous times in Granville's history, and it's really hard to pin down exactly what each of them did. But they had their hands in almost every business when the town started. They owned the Ricker Brothers Lumber Store. They lumberyard when the train came, and then 1884, the first store in town was started by the Ricker Brothers. Henry Ricker is noted as the elected treasurer of Granville. There's also Ricker Bank. Ricker Dance Hall was located downtown, and the Ricker service station. So Henry Ricker also served as mayor for a couple years and on the independent school board. The Ricker brothers each served as mayor and on council alternating years. They kind of alternated on and off doing their civic duties. The Ricker brothers and family enterprise directly contributed to Granville's early growth in basic services in the form of mail, communication, merchandise, lumber, banking, civic leadership. They basically connected the town to the outside world and gave people living here necessary business and practical tools for the town to grow and survive and function. Saw a job to do, I suppose, and they just did it. So once the railroad arrived in 1883, the town went up very quickly. Of the town founders, I'm calling them, Jacob Fish, I would say, is one of them. One of the first people to build a house here. He was born in Germany, died in his family home in Granville. He's actually buried over in the St. Joseph Cemetery. Lived here for 35 years. He was a community leader as a merchant. He was also a postmaster a couple of times. So he would have directly contributed to early growth of the town. Let's see. Peter Gallus is also one of the first. One of the first to build a home here. He transitioned from farming into business as the town was formed because it needed, people to work, people to build the town. He took over running the first hotel from Leonard Hill. He owned and operated the Gallus Saloon. You can see on that blue map over there, he owned a lot of lots downtown. So he would have directly contributed to Granville's early growth through housing, hospitality, and commerce. He would have welcomed travelers, created gathering places, helped establish commercial activity, and a growing railroad that the community needed.
I think he ran the first brothel too.
So,
He just looks like a type that would,
and there wasn't just one, there were many bars here.
And one was called the Bloody Bucket.
Yeah, there's the Bloody Bucket. I did read that. Nicholas Didier was born in Illinois in 1858. He died here in Granville in 1910. He's Luxembourg and German descent. He bought a store from the Ricker brothers and ran that, his store right there. He must have been a very well-trusted man because he served as founder and then secretary of the independent school district. He was mayor for a little while. On that blue map is Barbara Didier, owns a lot. How do I explain where that lot is? It's the empty bunkers lot behind us right here.
Oh, okay, on the corner.
Yeah. Yeah, so just this empty lot right over here is where their house was. What else? He's also buried in the St. Joseph Cemetery next to his wife Barbara, so you can see that his gravestone's still there. He would have directly contributed to Granville's early growth by establishing a public school system, helped sustain the town's business district, and well as his serving as a civic duty as mayor. The Graff family were also one of the most.
That's the house.
That's the house. Oh yeah, sorry.
That's the house.
Yes, that's the house that was there on that lot. And you guys remember that was a Centennial home for the yeah. So the Graff family were also one of the most influential in Granville's early history. Theodore Graff was one of Granville's leading businessmen, father to Henry and Nicholas Graff. 1887, he and Henry Ricker organized a bank in Granville, giving the young town its first banking institution. Before that, farmers had to travel to larger towns for financial services. And the partnerships of Graff and Ricker brothers went back and forth for many years. They worked for each other, and then they would own the bank, and then the other guy would work for him, and then it was very hard to pin down exactly what was going on. They also started and owned the first concrete stoneworks, and that was the largest in Sioux County. They were prominent in banking and manufacturing. They would have directly contributed to Granville's early growth. Couldn't find any pictures of them. The families now probably have them wherever they are. But this is a couple ads from their banks.
Where's the, does anybody know here what the bank on the right? I mean,
So-
I remember the one on the left on the corner down
That's
there.
where the monument is now.
No, the one on the left is.
The one on the right is where the American Bank is today.
American Bank.
I thought the one on the left.
The one on the left is.
Yeah, the left is where the one. That's where Mary Jumpers tore down.
The one on the right is where the American State Bank is. Right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Right. That one on the left is where the monument is. Jerry Jumpers tore that sucker down.
Exchange
Brick by
Bank is
brick.
where Mark is. And actually, the Graffs built the elevator down here too, which is the
Yeah.
oldest elevator in Iowa and the first elevator built in Iowa. So,
Oh, I didn't read that.
yep.
Okay, cool. So I also have, this is from the Centennial book. But I don't think this is there anymore.
Isn't that,
That's not
Greg
right.
Hansen?
No, that's this one.
Greg Hansen.
Oh, that one.
Yeah. So, yeah, again, they would have completely contributed to, building up Granville and making things a lot easier for farmers especially. Another notable contributor to Granville's community is Reverend Michael McCarthy, W. McCarthy. He helped turn Granville's Catholic settlers from a scattered group of farm families into an organized parish and school community. About 70 Catholic families, this is from your guys' website, so 70 Catholic families in the Granville area decided in 1886 to build a church of their own. The wood frame church was completed before Father McCarthy arrived in early 1888. On March 25th, 1888, which was Palm Sunday, he celebrated the first Mass in Granville's new St. Joseph Church. But under his leadership, the parish also added the parish house and rectory, a Catholic school, with an initial enrollment of about 50 children. And then when classes opened in December of 1888. So those achievements really only happened about 6 years after Granville was platted. So the church and school really helped establish Granville as a permanent family community and not merely just a collection of stores beside a railroad. His role was important to the early growth of the town because before that, Catholic families depended on traveling priests or traveling to other churches, and a resident priest meant that they could have regular masses, baptisms, marriages, funerals, and religious instruction. It also would have encouraged families to stay in the area and made this town more attractive to settlers. And the parish included Luxembourgish and German-speaking families and Irish Catholic households. Even though they did not share the same language or national background, St. Joseph gave them a common institution around which the community could organize. Father McCarthy was only here about 3 years. Subsequent priests were Father Tierney, Father Andler, Father Stromberg. All worked hard during early development up until Father Gerleman, who began building the church that you guys have today. That was dedicated in 1905. So I also included in here just notable mention, because I couldn't find a lot of information on some of these people. Like Oberman would be a good one, because Oberman owned the furniture store, the hardware store, undertaking. So not only would he fix your dead bodies, but you can also fix your furniture as well. The Overman Tavern, the Royal Hotel, obviously that still stands today. Gerlach and Blaser General Store was one of the first general stores. Casper Gopel, he ran the first shoe and shoe repair store. The Muroff meat market and blacksmith shop, those might be a little bit later than the early 1900s. I really couldn't determine that, but I put it in there anyway. Yeah, Boderman and Stover had the first creamery. So we talked a lot about German-speaking settlers and pioneers that settled here. The strongest surviving account of the Irish pioneer experience near Granville is that of Josephine Donovan, who, she's the author of Black Soil, the story of 1882. So she was born in Granville in 1888 and grew up just north of town, 1 mile north, if I'm not mistaken. I believe it's 1 mile north. So she inherited her father's journal, who was a local homesteader, and she used those experiences from his journal to write Black Soil. Originally, she wrote Black Soil as her thesis in college. It was published as a novel in 1930, and though the Connor family is fictional, the experiences were very real. So Tim and Nell Connor faced arriving in the open prairie with help from old Dutch Fred, who was not Dutch, he was Deutsch. They established an isolated farm. They struggled with homesickness and loneliness. They endured the devastating grasshopper years, drought, crop failure, fear of starvation, the difficulty of raising children far from a community, and blizzards in Iowa, which are something all on their own. So they preserved their Irish Catholic identity while adapting to frontier life. Although Granville's not mentioned in the book, Josephine Donovan wrote of growing up just north of town, so it was based on, her father coming here. She wrote of good harvests, and then the railroad, stores and homes being erected. The neighborhood was completely revolutionized, and that is why now Granville is known as the home of Black Soil. And as of January 1st, 2026, the novel Black Soil is actually considered public domain by the U.S. government. So it can be reproduced and remade. It's not copyrighted any longer. So I have a PDF copy of it. If you write your email down on a paper over there, I can email it to you. But it's interesting. It's kind of hard to read. It's very boring. But it's also interesting.